Isn't it about time? Time theft is perhaps the most common form of unethical workplace conduct, and it covers a wide range of behaviors. On the not that bad end of the spectrum, you have things like zoning out during a meeting or spending a little bit too much time on your bathroom break. I couldn't find any conclusive stats on this, but I would estimate that roughly 100% of people have committed this kind of time theft.
Yawn. 4 seconds.
What are you doing?
Oh, you had said that you don't do anything personal during work time, so I'm just making sure.
If you haven't, you might be a robot. One source I found broadly referred to these behaviors as shirking, which I feel is a perfect blend of descriptive and kind of silly. Shirking looks very different in different jobs. Some jobs have very strict schedules that make time theft like this fairly difficult. For example, I made an entire video about the insanely strict monitoring and benchmarks in Amazon warehouses that make it pretty much impossible to even slow down, let alone slack off. But if you're working as something like a graphic designer, it's a lot easier to say that you're searching for inspiration on a design when in reality you're just planning your weekend. It's not like you can actually track what's going on inside someone's head. Even these fairly innocent lapses can become pretty problematic if they happen too consistently. A salaried worker being late once or twice really isn't that big of a deal. But a salaried worker showing up 30 minutes late every day really starts to add up in the grand scheme of cost per hour. The average employer loses 4.5 hours per employee per week to time theft, and I would guess that the vast majority of that time comes from these fairly innocent behaviors. But I still think that most of these types of time theft are pretty forgivable. They may need correcting and they aren't necessarily ethical, but they usually lack malicious intent. It's just human nature to not be totally efficient all the time. Perpetrators aren't usually thinking, I'm gonna cheat the system and get away with doing less work. They're just being normal, easily distracted people. It's worth trying to be better, but you aren't super evil or anything. But there are more egregious types of time theft. One of the worst and most common types is referred to as buddy punching, which is kind of a fun name. This is where you have a buddy clock you in when you aren't actually there. This falls under the broader category of the not so creatively named time card fraud. The other common type of time card fraud is exaggerated work hours. Again, this is very different for different jobs, but it mostly applies to people who are paid hourly. Any method that you use to show that you worked more hours than you actually did falls under exaggerated hours. Many people justify this with little inflations. An extra 10 minutes here, rounding up when it's kind of a stretch, things like that. But it often adds up to several extra hours each week. I personally consider all types of time card fraud to be more egregious than shirking because it's really just fraud. Really. What's the difference between the CFO that's fixing the books to embezzle money and an employee that's fixing their time card to embezzle money? You're just stealing. The danger of time theft, as we've seen with our examples, is that it is incredibly easy to justify. And justification is one of the 3 legs of the fraud triangle. When you have all 3 pieces, fraud is much more likely, and justification is often the last piece. But time theft usually takes place on a small enough scale that we can really easily make excuses. It's easy to justify. But what starts out as 10 or 15 minutes here or there can quickly become so much more. I say this as someone who is incredibly prone to time theft. One of the reasons I've spent so much of my career being self-employed is because I know I'm susceptible to these behaviors. Speaking of time theft, I just want to steal a moment of your time and ask you to like this video. It takes a second or maybe 2 and makes a really big difference. There are a handful of jobs out there that care more about what gets done than about when or for how long. And in those cases, time theft is a lot less of an issue. In those jobs, it's actually the company that is more likely to commit the time theft, rather than the employee. That's right. time theft goes both ways. Or at least it does if we get a little bit flexible with our definitions. When a company doesn't pay an employee for all of the hours they've worked, it's usually called wage theft. Hourly workers will usually see wage theft when they're asked to perform work while off the clock, like on a meal break. Obviously, there is more blatant fraud that can happen this way as well, like if an employer is doctoring a time card to show that you worked less hours than you actually did. In my mind, this all kinda sounds a lot like time theft still. What's way more common than this type of fraudulent wage theft is scope creep, which isn't usually called a type of time theft, but really it should be. Imagine you're hired to shear an alpaca. As is common, you agree to a price of $45. But then, once you show up and do the job, your client asks if you can also trim their toenails while you're at it. The alpaca's toenails, not your client's. That would be weird. Being the experienced alpaca groomer that you are, you can do this fairly easily, but you aren't really comfortable confronting the client about increasing how much you're getting paid since you already agreed on this price, so you end up doing the extra work in exchange for no extra money. That's scope creep. While experienced freelancers and contractors deal with this all the time, they fairly quickly learn to just deal with the discomfort and ask for the extra money, or they go broke. But scope creep can be a huge issue for salaried employees as well. Have you ever had a moment where you realize that half the things you do every day are outside your job description, or are supposed to be someone else's job? Or that your boss keeps giving you more and more responsibilities and duties, but without a promotion or a pay raise? That's scope creep. And honestly, I don't see how it's any different from time theft or wage theft. Your employer is asking you to do more than you agreed to in exchange for the same amount of money, essentially stealing your time. Whether it's from shirking, buddy punching, wage theft, or scope creep, all time theft is bad. It accounts for close to $500 billion worth of damages every year, which is several times more than all other types of fraud or theft combined. It's actually kind of hard to fathom how stupidly large that number is. But the only way to fix it is for individual employees and employers just like you to choose to do something about it. Be more honest. And keep those around you accountable, even if it involves having an awkward conversation with a coworker or with your boss. You may just be one person, but your decisions can make the world a little bit of a better place. Time theft is fundamentally intertwined with the rise of quiet quitting, which I also made a video on. You can watch it right here. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.